program, this speech is titled Reinventing Relationships, but I thought it sounded kind of more self-helpy than I actually meant. So I'm going to retitle it now as The Intimate is Political, Finding Out Different Ways to Free Love. When I was about 12 years old, a teacher at my school got us to make a poster that said who we are, what we wanted to be, and so forth. I don't remember my own, but I do remember standing with my friend, scoffing at the poster of a girl who had said, "My dream is to get married, and my desire is to have a car." We were beyond that sort of rot. We were Anne and Annie, and we had greater dreams than this malarkey. We were jerks, right? We were 12, and we were jerks. But if you were to listen to much of the campaign around national marriage equality, you wouldn't know that little girls like me and Annie existed. I've read several articles that said things like, "I grew up, much like every girl in Western society, wanting to get married." I've been at rallies where people said at the front, "Like all little girls, I dreamed of a white wedding." More often than not, I've turned away from these rallies with some level of alienation. We are strange and uncomfortable bedfellows indeed, if expressing your own story involves suppressing mine, consciously done or not. So, while I'm up here, I'll tell my own story. I don't really remember what I wanted to be when I was 12. I think it was a combination of actor, chef, musician, interpreter. Probably I just wanted to sit in the sun and play boggle. I did have some inkling, I think, that my future might involve feminism. My mother, over there, sang us songs like Bread and Roses and Don't Be Too Polite Girls as lullabies. It was great. So it's been kind of a part of the consciousness. I don't think that she or I really suspected that I'd get involved in free love activism. Who thinks that when you're 12, right? The theorists on the subject of free love are kind of few and far between, and you almost certainly won't learn about them in high school. So what I did learn about free love came, like many things, from personal experience. When I was around 18, I was friends with a man and, well, you know, you're friends with someone and then suddenly one day they're attractive and it's hard to breathe properly around them. Shortly after this somewhat unsettling yet beautiful revelation, I asked him if I could meet his girlfriend, who he'd been dating for a year. He was important to me, she was important to him. I thought it would be a good idea. And I liked her. We had interests in common, you might say. So I was in a bit of a fix. I still cared for this man, but I cared for her too now, and I couldn't do anything to hurt her. So I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind sharing him with you, if this is the way it has to go. That silent proposal all came to nothing in the end, but it did provide the basis for a foundation of thought that would come into my life a few years later. I've heard quite a few stories like mine, of people realizing through personal experience that exclusive monogamy wasn't for them. I've heard even more stories of similar situations like mine, which ended instead in affairs or breakups or even violence. But my point is, telling these stories is not enough. We could sit here and tell our individual stories until the cows came home, and we would not gain a further understanding of what is really going on with intimate relationships. The queer community has an advantage in this regard. When we hear the different stories shared here today, of being beaten up for being queer, of being denied healthcare for being transgender and so on, we can file it under a matrix of queer oppression. I suggest that what we need to do with intimate relationships is talk about different ways in which relationship oppression is a reality, and talk about different ways in which we can free love. So what do I mean when I say free love? Honestly, the more I look at it, the more complicated it gets. I think when most people think free love, they kind of get a vision of a sort of bacchanalian free-for-all of sex, drugs, acid, hippies in a field at Woodstock, kind of like the 60s. Personally, I think
That's quite good fun, if I recall.
Okay, well, whatever. The 60s that may or may not have been real, expressed in popular culture. Personally, I think this sort of thing sounds like a hell of a party. But it's not specifically what I mean when I talk about free love. Nor is it the more refined polyamory, which has kind of come up lately, which has an emphasis on having many intimate relationships at the same time. So I want to talk about different kinds of freedom. David Foster Wallace, in his commencement speech, said that the kind of freedom that you'll hear about most in society takes place in the world of winning and achieving and displaying. It's the individual freedom that we'll see in marketing campaigns that say that you are special, you are unique, you must stand out from the crowd. This is what David Foster Wallace called functioning on your default setting. It's what happens with your immediate senses. As far as I know, I am the absolute centre of the universe. Everything in my immediate senses is telling me this. This sort of freedom has a lot to recommend it. However, if indeed I am at the centre of the universe, that means that every single bad thing that inevitably comes my way is specifically designed to hurt me. Operating on this default setting does not tend to be functional for most relationships. Let's take an example of an exclusively monogamous couple, person A and person B. At some point, person B decides, well, not decides, it just happens that they are attracted to someone outside of the relationship. Operating on their default setting, person A might think that person B is doing this specifically to hurt them, is because they do not love them enough. Similarly, person B might see A's jealousy and conclude that person A is trying to control them. Such a relationship would probably end in a breakup, both parties unable to reconcile with each other's different realities. So let's talk about another kind of freedom, one that you don't really hear a lot about in the public sphere. It's the freedom of gaining consciousness, of being able to step beyond your default setting and put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's the freedom of awareness that comes from education. In our monogamous coupling, person A might see person B's attraction to someone else and then embark on an earnest exploration of why person B is attracted to the other person. Maybe they could then become friends. Similarly, person B might be able to see A's insecurity and try to ask why they're like that and what person B can do to make them feel more secure. Foster Wallace said that this kind of freedom involves attention and awareness and discipline and effort and the ability to really care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over again in myriad petty little unsexy ways every day. Sorry, I like that quote. So, if we're looking at free love like this, then it appears that free love involves both an expression of desire and a sacrifice for this. This is kind of obvious, and we do it unconsciously in our communities in different ways all the time. Sorry. So in my sort of relationship utopia, everyone of every different sexuality would be able to function and be okay. It's not impossible that someone who is more inclined to monogamy, perhaps they're more introverted or simply just don't have time for more relationships, could be in a relationship with a person who wants a different lover every night of the week. And all of these would be okay. We're a long way off reaching my ideal. Exclusive monogamy as a relationship form still dominates almost every facet of our lives. It's achieved the ultimate in an ideology, in rendering itself invisible. Exclusive monogamy, we're told, is just the way things are. Anyone who says otherwise is immature, deluded, or, horrors, a slut. So, this kind of ideology, well, we must call it ideology, this is something going on here, dominates at several different levels. I'm going to paraphrase or bastardize a quote from post-Fordist scholar Paulo Virno, who said that it would be comforting to assume that we could fix the world by sitting around patiently clarifying things until everyone did it better. But there is a material basis for ideology that replicates and reproduces deception. This prejudice is still acting at a level of relationships. But what is a relationship? Even the concept of it is kind of strange when you think about it. I think there are roughly 3 categories in which we tend to place people that we're close to: family, friends, and relationships. As far as I can work out, being in a relationship involves some kind of sexual and emotional agreement between two or more parties. Of course, not every sexual agreement is going to be a relationship, necessarily, but it's quite rare to see explicitly non-sexual relationships classed as, relationships. I think that the romantic relationships of asexual people is a rare exception. So, as Bill has pointed out, marriage is the kind of highest form of relationship that we see. There are structural benefits, of course, of being married. In the US, it enables you to get health insurance, can ease up adoption, visitation rights, immigration, and so on. Similarly, there are laws which kind of eliminate any other kind of relationship. In Pakistan, for example, you can be stoned for adultery, and I think it's still illegal in the US military, which is kind of strange.
To be stoned.
What?
Different kind of stone, I think. Yes.
Yeah, we should have interpreted it differently. Similarly, of course, there are material benefits. Sorry, no, I messed that up. The whole benefit of being married, or even in a de facto relationship, is a bit of a double-edged sword. For example, with StudyLink, if you're in what's called a recognised relationship, recognised by who and what, I don't really understand, then your benefit will go down. Similarly, it's difficult to get the DPB. If you have this kind of sectioned off understanding of what a relationship is, it also meant that until quite recently, rape within marriage was legal. I think that we might still see that in de facto relationships. Obviously not legally, but there might be an idea, say, that if your boyfriend rapes you and then you break up, you might be lying about it because you're butthurt about a bad relationship, rather than acknowledging that violence actually took place. So this kind of bleeds into what I want to talk about in terms of the social understanding of how exclusive monogamy dominates. I'm not sure in New Zealand exactly what the legal benefits are of being married, and I assume that quite a lot of the impetus for it is a social thing. People want to be able to say they're married, not civil union. They want to be able to say wife, husband, and so on, to fit in with their families. This is, of course, a legitimate ideal. Queer people deserve to fit into their culture as much as anyone else. I want to say at this point that when I talk about an ideology of relationships, there's not much point in blaming specific individuals. If we are part of a system, we are inevitably going to perpetuate certain acts of it. So that's okay. Well, no, it's not okay, but, you know. But one of the main, biggest barriers, in a way, to achieving a sort of relationship liberation, if you will, are the internal barriers. These parts of us that feel so deep that they can't be touched by ideology because they're an expression of raw, naked emotion. I'd like to take a survey of the room for this case. Could you please all raise your hands if at any time you have been in an intimate relationship? Right. And during that relationship, have you had any sexual or emotional feelings for someone else? This could be anything, a friend, a celebrity, someone walking down the street. I should put my hand up for all of these as well. Okay. And this question, how many of you have had some level of guilt feeling for this? I'm asking these questions not so I can stand up front and go, see, part of the oppression. But it's more to highlight how deep these things really go. We live in a deeply sex-negative culture, which in its current incarnation is quite dangerous because it looks like the opposite. If sex is plastered on billboards, it's quite difficult to say, oh, our culture never talks about sex. However, it's a very particular kind of sex that we're seeing on the billboards. For example, women in advertising, you know, there will be feminine, thin, blonde, big breasts, etc. Usually the kind of sex we see in things like mainstream pornography also looks the same. It's kind of smileless, and everyone's body functions like a well-oiled machine. So, I was thinking of George Orwell, who wrote in 1984 that sexual privation was desirable because it induced hysteria, which could then be transformed into war fever and leader worship. In this current economy, it's transferred not so much into war fever, but the immensely profitable venture of shopping. So, sex sells, and sex is sold. We are told that we cannot have any sex that doesn't fit this very particular kind. But, good news, the future is bright. The market can help you achieve this sex. So it's a kind of brilliant bait and switch. The market has created genuine problems for people, expanded the ramifications of them, and then posits itself as the solution. This isn't, of course, limited to sex, but into the way we do relationships on an emotional level. I think a lot of the way this comes through is in things like romantic comedies. There's a concept that everyone is out on a mission to find the one, the soulmate. They're, worst of all, probably their other half. Therefore, it seems they are incomplete without a partner. I was thinking of Slavoj Žižek, great philosopher, has a massive blind spot when it comes to relationships, who said that after he's finished a relationship, he concludes that not only is he no longer in love with him, but he never was. It seems a very desolate way of conducting your intimate life. But these things are difficult. We're told that when our other partner finds someone else attractive, that we are automatically losing out. Again, my hand survey. Hands up everyone in an intimate relation who has been in an intimate relationship and experienced jealousy. It's a big problem. Jealousy, as we all know, is a hurt. It's a pain reaction. I think it's very telling that our culture is still treating jealousy in many ways as a positive, as a sign of deep love rather than deep insecurity. One of the frightening implications of this is domestic violence. Real or perceived infidelity is a leading cause of domestic violence, and yet when people die of this, we call it a crime of passion. Similarly, looking at the example of Romeo and Juliet, they kill themselves because they can't live without the other. But our cultural reading of the play doesn't treat this as a tragedy because relationship addiction is disturbing, but more because love hurts and things got in the way of the fruition of this. So our model of relationships desperately needs changing because it is killing people. Of course, not everyone who is involved in an exclusive monogamy model will kill everyone. Good to know, people. But of course, not everyone who's queer-phobic is going to beat up a queer person either. These kind of things represent the extreme end of an overarching system. I was reading an article, not to belabor this point, but it's mildly interesting to me. I was reading an article about a guy who was talking to his girlfriend about this new polyamory stuff he'd just been reading about, and what did she think about it. She said that she would cut his dick off before she let him do it. We're living in a society where it is easier to imagine mutilating the genitalia of your supposed loved one than it is to imagining an alternative to exclusive monogamy. So, I'll try to touch on the reasons that people might have jealousy. When we're clinging to an exclusive monogamy model, it's often because we're insecure people living in an insecure world. I think it's very important that we have an intersectional understanding of both how relationships work and how they tie into wider politics. Like I said, free love is about attention and awareness. How are we supposed to have free love when it's still acceptable in some circles to say, oh, I'm just not attracted to Asians, or I would never date a Maori? On a structural level of racism, how are we meant to break down the dominant Western mode of discourse around relationships when other cultures are pushed to the sidelines? When indigenous cultures are assimilated and we still have an idea that Africa is a country? It's kind of difficult to involve those countries in a global dialogue about free love when they have rather more pressing concerns. The highest priority is to get people to stop killing each other first, before we talk about our feelings. Take the Congo, for example, where there's a conflict going on whose death toll dwarfs pretty much any other current conflict or recent one. We can't have free love when bombs are being dropped. We also have to address the quiet war on which we have built our entire society. One of the biggest barriers to free love, I believe, is the rigidity of gender roles and the concomitant sexual and emotional mores they bring. In terms of sexual morality, women, transgender, genderqueer and intersex people are obviously quite highly affected by this. Us people are not to have too much sex because it's dirty or gross, makes us a slut, and the structure of the medical industry means that many intersex people are unable to enjoy sex at all. On an emotional level, many of us minorities may seek refuge and security in an intimate relationship to shield us from the horrors and violence of the outside world. The intimate relationship model also applies to male gender roles. If, acting as an alpha male, you have to suppress all your emotions, it's quite difficult to find even one person as that sort of outlet, let alone many. One of the leading causes of young male suicide is triggered when a relationship breaks up. So this is clearly a problem. Like Bill said, there are material benefits for gender minorities of being married or in an intimate relationship in terms of financial security. There's a lot of workplace discrimination going on in terms of equal pay and stuff, which leads me to my next point, handy segue, about the queer community. Of course, again, we cannot have free love when queerphobia and transphobia and so on exists. But the existence of homophobia at all is intimately tied to the nuclear family. Like Bill said, this construction arose in the Industrial Revolution, which was a time of kind of remarkable sexual prudishness. During that time, certain acts like sodomy and stuff were banned in many countries. And the word homosexual was only coined in 1869, because prior to that, there was more of an understanding of, different sexual acts as acts, rather than representing an overarching identity. All right, here are my notes. Sorry, I'm skipping a bunch of stuff. Okay. If you are operating in a model where the nuclear family is king, queer sexuality is a direct attack on this paradigm, of course. This is part of what makes me slightly squeamish about the National Marriage Equality Campaign. Because of the way things are structured, queer people are signing up to an institution which has been, across history, quite responsible for some of their oppression. Again, of course, we live in this particular culture, so I don't wish to blame individuals, but it's worth pointing out that those systems exist. So, to finish up, it's clear that the barriers to free love are pretty immense. But I'm kind of dismayed that a lot of people sort of gave up on it because it didn't work in the 60s. Are we always so easily discouraged? We haven't yet eradicated homophobia either, but I'm damned if I'm going to stop trying. Try thinking of free love as a verb, freeing love, opening relationships. It's about a process, similar to revolution. I have to believe that we can gain this freedom of consciousness, of empathy with other people's intimate realities. This is the kind of thing I take for most of my activism, of a sheer desperate level of optimism. Because I think that humans are capable of better than this. I like the line from the rapper Aesop Rock that says, "Life's not a bitch, life is a beautiful woman. You only call her a bitch because she wouldn't let you get that pussy." Yes, mother, problematic, I know. But maybe we can enter into a consensual agreement with life, where we can have access to that pussy, to all the pussies, and the cocks, and all the genetic variations on genitalia that come in between. Sorry. Yes, always. But maybe we can move to a time where we can really make love and not war, and where everyone in the community can have their sexual and emotional needs satisfied. I don't expect this to happen within my lifetime, In fact, I'm not sure that humanity will ever get set. We've kind of pushed the planet a bit too far with climate change and are rapidly hurtling towards our at least partial extinction. But, like I said, the way we do intimate relationships affects us at deep emotional levels and also at the highest power structures in society. If we start to share everything, from sexual and emotional partners to the commodities that keep this consumer economy going, we could at least slow down some of our massive resource consumption and partially delay our inevitable rush off the cliff. I wish everyone what love they can find. It may, after all, be hidden in plain sight all around us if we know how to look for it. Good luck.